I think we really need to decongest not just Bangalore, but other cities like Bangalore, which have got a bulk of the investment. People are now getting money for free and not really wanting to work. And I think that's really posing a problem.
There is an interest in investing in India. There is an interest in foreign companies in acquiring companies in India that have proved themselves to be valuable. And founders will find that if they're able to prove the value that they're bringing, they'll find that they're able to easily raise capital. So then where are the gaps?
Hello and welcome to the second episode of our podcast series, Transforming India, The Road to 2047, presented by Mint in partnership with JSA. In our first episode, we explored the foundational aspects of India's economic aspirations and set the agenda for what it will take to make our country a developed nation by 2047. Today, we dive deep into the realm of investment and economic growth with a focus on development from the micro to the macro in India. Our country's growth story has often been driven by the top-down approach, with major metropolitan areas and industrial hubs receiving the lion's share of investment. This may well have been needed at the time to establish the key hubs of growth. However, to truly harness the potential of a diverse and dynamic country, it's crucial to explore strategies that promote inclusive and geographically and socio-economically dispersed economic growth. Join us as we uncover insights, strategies, and real-world examples that can help shape a more balanced and inclusive growth trajectory for India. Whether you're an investor, policymaker, entrepreneur, or simply interested in the future of India's economy, this episode will offer valuable perspectives and actionable ideas. We have two exceptional guests with us to discuss this very idea. Joining us is Mr. Vivek Chandy, Joint Managing Partner at JSA. With a distinguished career spanning over 3 decades, Vivek specializes in mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and corporate restructuring. His strategic vision and comprehensive knowledge of investment dynamics have played a pivotal role in numerous high-profile transactions. Vivek's commitment to fostering inclusive growth through innovative strategies positions him as a leading voice in the realm of economic development. Along with Vivek, we have Archana Tewary, a partner at JSA, where she brings her extensive expertise in corporate, commercial, and compliance matters. With a keen focus on the retail and tech sectors, Archana advises on complex transactions and strategic investments, offering valuable insights into legal frameworks that support economic growth. Her profound understanding of the intricacies of international investment flows and regulatory compliance makes her a sought-after advisor in the industry. Welcome both of you to Transforming India, The Road to 2047.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Vivek, my first question is to you. Bangalore is a prime example of how entrepreneurs have created an IT growth multiplier, enabling bottom-up growth. As India continues to build on this foundation, the question remains, what's next for the country's economic development?
I think we really need to decongest not just Bangalore, but other cities like Bangalore, which have got a bulk of the investment. And today, I think we are facing asset price inflation. And the cost of everything, even a typical IT employee who was able to work for a few years and buy his own apartment is not able to do that anymore because prices have gone up so high. And when it comes to GCCs being established in Bangalore, Gurgaon, Pune, Hyderabad, the cost of land is so high that the rents that they are paying are unaffordable. So many of them are now thinking of, if I come to Bangalore, I will come to one of these 5 or 6 different places. The prices are so high, so they are saying, let me go to another country. So I think we should make some changes, decongest, and move to other places. I was just a few weeks ago speaking to one of our clients, and he'd come from the US. He's the chairman and managing director of one of the large Fortune 500 companies. And he was saying, tell me why I should come to India. And he was very concerned. And I gave him a lot. Naturally, I was persuading him to come here. And I gave him a lot of examples of clients who had come into India and done really well. And he made a very important point. He said that most of those examples you're giving me are in industries where there's little or no government support needed. In the IT industry, in the high-tech industry. He said, but if I come into an industry, whether it was, I'm not going to get into which sector he came into, but he gave an example. He said if it was real estate, if it was mining, sectors like that, where I really need to work with the government, how am I confident that I'm going to get their support? I don't want anything special, but I want to ensure that they don't come and make it difficult for me. And so then it really made sense, because he said, I don't want to trip up on FCPA. I don't want to have someone lobbying for me. He also gave an example where he said, a few years ago, we did an acquisition in the US. By that acquisition, we got an Indian subsidiary. And it's what the lawyers call as a FOCC, which is a foreign-owned and controlled company. And he said that FOCC wanted to make a small acquisition in India. The position was so complex because, we went to some authorized dealers, which are banks. I went to 4 authorized dealers. Each one gave us a different view on whether we could pay deferred consideration, which pricing guidelines to follow. And, he thanked us and said that thanks to us, we liaised with the RBI and he was able to do that transaction. But he said, those are the problems that we are facing because the law is so unclear and no one wants to need to deal with the government to get your project to be successful. With regard to China, now China, politically it's a communist country, but the way they did their development over the last 20 years, they did it like any capitalist country would have been proud of the way they did it. And in 1991, which was an important year for India, when, all the reforms started, at that point of time, I understand that China and India, the average pay for an employee was the same. Since 1991, the average pay in India has risen 7-fold till today. It's risen 40-fold in China. Why have they done that? It's just, apart from the other problems that one faces with investing in China, and we are hoping now that the US companies are going to be putting their money into India, the fact is, when they want you to operate there and when they want to encourage people there, it's very easy to do business there.
Which allows me to segue into the next question that I have, which in other countries like US and China, states compete vigorously to attract investment. So in India, we face a significant regional growth concentration, the same states often benefiting. And like you pointed out earlier, we need to create different centers of growth, which is perhaps not happening at the pace that we would love to have. How can policymakers and businesses collaborate to channel investments effectively across a broader geographic and economic spectrum in India?
See, competition is very good, whether it's between people, whether it's between states, whether it's between nations. But I believe each of the states in India needs to play to their own strength. In Karnataka, for instance, very good for IT, very good for the startup environment. Andhra Pradesh, again, biotech, pharmaceutical companies. Tamil Nadu, it's manufacturing industries, automobiles. Kerala and several of the states in the north, very good for tourism. There are states where, they've got superb mines and minerals where that can be extracted. There are states where very good for renewables and they are encouraging them. So I think each state needs to play to its strength and, that way ensure that investment, is made all around the country and not only in a few pockets where after a period of time, those pockets will be saturated and people will then feel that I need to go to another country. So it's better that, it's distributed all around India rather than actually being distributed in several countries that are competing with India.
In which case, the federal-state collaboration that is needed for bettering the ease of doing business is something that we need to focus on in terms of policy making, in terms of implementation.
That is correct. It's important that, that the federal government, encourages people and directs them to the various states where they are available. But on this point, I must mention that I used to believe that state subsidies were useful. And, in economics, when I was learning economics, I read about the multiplier effect when you make these subsidies and you encourage consumption. But looking at how subsidies have, been allotted, I'm finding that more often than not, it's going to the wrong people. People are now getting money for free and not really wanting to work. And I think that's really posing a problem. I was in conversation a couple of days ago with Ruchir Sharma, and he made an interesting point. He was talking about the zombie companies in the US, and he said they are too big to fail. It's like some of our companies over here. And he said, millions and millions of dollars are being poured into them to support them. Billionaires are being created by doing that. But the actual people who are sought to be benefited are really not getting that benefit. And so I think that's an important thing. Don't give subsidies, but just encourage people to go and invest in the right places. And I have no doubt with, the various skills that our Indian population has, that, things can go only better.
Archana, Vivek makes a lot of interesting points, which brings me to a question. If I may, a slightly broader, macro view of what the economy is. So, how can we as a country develop into quote unquote the new economy in a broader manner and encourage the entrepreneurial spirit that Vivek was speaking about? It's not just about the government, it's not just about subsidies, but encouraging the entrepreneurial spirit across the country. What keeps a startup from a tier 2 or a tier 3 city from raising those funds that they need, for example? Effectively, we need those tier 2 and tier 3 cities to also grow along with the growth hubs that have already been created. So how would you look at it?
Sure, and that's a very interesting thing to think about on multiple levels. But one of the interesting facts that I found was that apparently 45% of startups which were registered last year were from tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So there is this entrepreneurial spirit that needs to be encouraged and nurtured. But how do we then help these startups raise funds, scale up operations, or at a national level, and look to service the wider contours of the country, the wider corners of the country, instead of only localized growth of their business? So if you look at how fundraising and how investments have happened in the startup space over the past few years, as opposed to, let's say, a decade ago, investors are no longer looking, when they look at early stage or venture capital investments, they're no longer looking at, is this replicating this idea in a foreign country in India? So there is a need for founders to offer India-specific solutions or India-specific apps, which will, or technology or products or services. I think Vivek made a valid point about products being lower than services in India. So products and services which are catering to Indian needs. So those kinds of companies and those kinds of entrepreneurs will find that venture capital investors are willing to back them. And the venture capital ecosystem is a very supportive ecosystem. So there is a spirit of mentorship amongst Indian venture capital investors who would like to almost get involved in the business to help the founder navigate the legal regime, navigate the compliances, etc. So it's a nice thing to be a part of. If you look at later stage fundraising by Indian companies, it's no longer a rush to invest in companies because they have these marquee investors on their board or on their cap table. It's about asking the questions of where's the profitability, where's the cash flow, what is the business model, and the diligence that investors are putting into making an investment decision is actually more intense now than it was earlier.
So they're asking the right questions at the right
time. Absolutely. And the founders who have the right answers will find that investors are eager to invest in them. So there is an interest in investing in India. There is an interest in foreign companies in acquiring companies in India that have proved themselves to be valuable. And founders will find that if they're able to prove the value that they're bringing, they'll find that they're able to easily raise capital. So then where are the gaps? One is, I think we need to think about whether if a founder is working out of a tier 2 or tier 3 city, for instance, Indore or Bhopal or somewhere in Orissa, will he get the right talent to support what he wants to do? That might be one of the reasons why a founder will move to a Gurgaon or a Bangalore, because he wants the right talent. Of course, with technology today, you can sit anywhere and engage talent anywhere in India. But in order to scale up at a rapid rate, a founder might think about moving to these cities. And so we need to think about how do we broad base the talent itself. The second is the physical infrastructure that we need to provide. So the logistics network needs to grow to be able for a vendor sitting in one part of the country to be able to ship to another part of the country within the timelines that customer is used to. So if I in Bangalore am used to half an hour delivery, 10-minute delivery, 1-day delivery, and I'm going to have to wait for 2 or 3 days to buy a product, I might not buy that product. So how do we scale up that logistics? And then the third aspect is digital infrastructure. So we are talking about UPI being extremely prevalent, but today there are parts of the country where you can't use UPI. And companies have stepped in. So the Indian spirit of Jugaad has manifested itself to say that there are cash management companies which will collect physical cash and then deposit it electronically to the vendor. But this is an adjustment. Right. So how do we increase internet penetration and digital infrastructure penetration to help these founders do business the way someone sitting in a Bangalore or a Mumbai would do business? So I think these are the key questions. If we can address these gaps, then tier 2, tier 3 city founders will definitely prosper.
Interesting points, which again bring me to Vivek to ask you, how do the international fund flows impact those investment strategies in India? You've been dealing with international fund flows for 3 decades, and you've seen the pre-1991 and the post-1991 scenario. How has that changed? What legal considerations do you think should be addressed to optimize these flows for a more inclusive growth as we look forward to 2047?
No, I think there's no doubt that India is at a great place at this point in time. We have, at present, I understand that the GDP growth is about 8.2%. IMF has indicated that by 2028, we'll probably be the third largest economy. We have a very young population. We have the rule of law. So all these factors contribute to funds coming into India. If interest rates in the US actually decline a bit, I think the floodgates are going to open, and there's going to be so much more investment coming into India. So, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's only about India being an easy place to do business, with laws being very clear and not opaque. And then I think there'll be no stopping India, because there'll be no other jurisdiction where fund flow is going to come. We are a democracy. We've got good courts. I mean, I know there are issues with delays in the court system and things like that, but otherwise, I think we've got a great, common law system. And so I think it's a matter of time before more and more money comes into India.
You don't have a timeline in mind for this. You would say that this is a more continuous process than just keeping a 2028 in mind. This is a continuous process.
I think it's a process that, we need to clean up our act. Sadly, people really make big changes when there's a crisis. Now, whether it was the 1991 crisis in India, or whether it was in Greece a few years ago when there was a crisis, then people really pull up their socks and say that, I need to do something, serious to address the concerns. So hopefully there's not going to be any crisis in India. But if we realize that there's an opportunity over here and we're going to lose the opportunity if we don't do something, maybe things can be done more speedily, and that will benefit everybody.
And as military strategists would put it, wars are won in peacetime.
Absolutely.
Because we need to be prepared for that crisis when there is no crisis.
Absolutely. And one more point, I think, is on the way education is imparted in India. I'm a little concerned about it because, I think it's all about just doing well in an exam, being the first to run and stand in a line. Typically, when the traffic is moving on a road from east to west, you'll have some people from north to south trying to go and creating a deadlock over there. At the primary school education level itself, people should be taught that, if you just go in your line, it'll probably be the best, because it's good for everybody, even assuming that, the roads are going to be packed. So those are things that, need to change. Even now, like I made this point earlier about us developing services or being good at providing services and not products. The way engineers are taught, engineering, they need to be taught rather to think laterally. And that's something I'm not seeing so much of. Otherwise, I think there's no other place like India, and I think it's a huge, bright future for investment in India.
But the school question is kind of, it feeds into the employability question as well.
Yes.
You pointed out, Vivek, that lateral thinking is something that we lack systemically in terms of our school education. But Archana, I want to understand from you. We often talk about one of India's great strengths being its young population and its employable population and its demographic dividend that we have because of the sheer number of youths in the 15 to 25 category.
Okay.
Yet entrepreneurs and businesses often talk about there being the need to develop a skilled talent base, a trained talent base that can look forward to the future in terms of applying those technologies, applying those processes and systems to real life, to creating real life production solutions, right? So where is this gap coming from? How do we fill that?
So if we look at our industry in the practice of law, we see a large number of graduates eager to join the workforce every year, but only a small portion would have the skills and the background in terms of education to be able to jump right in and to contribute immediately in an effective manner or with limited training in an effective manner. Most of what's happening is, as Vivek said, you learn the information as a data dump with the hope that once you start working, you will understand how to practically apply it. Unfortunately, entrepreneurs don't have that that financial backing and the time to have someone join who has that, who needs that curve. And at the same time, they would like to keep the costs as light as possible, so they don't have the budget to allow for someone to train on the job. Now, this is something that the government is conscious of and is aware of. That's why we have the Skill India program, which has done very well. We have the announcement by the finance minister in the budget this year regarding an internship opportunity or a plan whereby the top 500 companies of the country will offer internships to youth with the perspective of training them to join the job. But I think a very valid point being made regarding the pedagogy of the education in India. We need the education in India to train people for practical aspects of the job. And it's probably happening at a slow pace, but it needs to be expedited, especially in sectors like AI and deep tech. We see often that founders come to us and say, we want to engage talent outside India because we don't have this in India. And that gap, if we can bridge, then founders will definitely want to use Indian talent because it's cheaper and it's easier to engage Indian talent than to engage someone else from a regulatory perspective. So that's one important aspect. The other important aspect is when we look at people working and innovating in the top centers of India, like the IITs and the IIMs, what they're putting together, what they're innovating, how do we bring those products to the attention of entrepreneurs? So IITs and IIMs across the country and various educational institutions have incubator programs whereby the people innovating in their labs will be able to, get the initial funding needed to do the proof of concept level of work. But after that, they need to scale up with the industry. And that gap of how the industry finds out about what technology exists and how it will tie into their needs, that is an important gap that we need to bridge and navigate. So how do we bring these companies into focus or these entrepreneurs into focus with the people who are developing the technology in India today? That's a very important aspect of how we build this area out, give the entrepreneurs the kind of talent and skill they need. And that could be anywhere in India. But also very often what we find is, as I mentioned earlier as well, founders want to access talent outside India to be able to bring those skills and develop those skills by way of training for people in India. And that's challenging to do because these founders can't compensate the external talent with cash. They need to find other ways to structure the incentives they would give to external talent. And that's a bit challenging in the regulatory framework today. So how do you offer someone sitting outside India perhaps stock options or other benefits that you would like to offer to them to make them work with you, but you're not able to because of the regulatory framework?
Incentives is one important point, but I've been speaking to some entrepreneurs, some founders who told me in the last 1 month or so, in preparation for this conversation that we wanted to have, is that by the time they have either trained people to implement certain technologies or to create new products or to market those products, to scale up those products, a new technology comes in and it makes that old technology either redundant or it creates a new market for the new tech, which means that the product managers and the engineers have to learn new tech all over again. And the founders do not have the budget or the time to quickly, make those changes. So in terms of policy, in terms of education, in terms of the regulatory framework that you spoke about, that gap seems to be a nuanced one, but it's a very important one for founders.
Yes.
For people who are doing on-the-ground work to scale up their business. Do you, in your experience, feel that need, or have you experienced this change that has happened so suddenly because of tech growing at a much faster pace than what we are adapting to? And in such cases, how does the legal framework, how does the policy framework, how can it help those founders overcome those challenges?
So this is very interesting because it's a very real issue for both the legal side of things as well as the tech side of things. One of the things that we see is the law is always catching up to the technology. So when the laws are drafted, they're drafted in the widest manner possible, like a net to catch any technology which may come up in the future. And that leaves entrepreneurs in a situation where they're not exactly sure if what they're doing is allowed in the law or not, and therefore they're not able to adapt immediately the technology that they need to for their business to fit into what's available in the market today. So that's a problem with the way that the law operates today, in the sense that the law does not get drafted with industry input. If these founders were able to give input on how the laws can be drafted and how they can operate, then I think we wouldn't face this problem so much as a regulatory gap. In terms of the talent gap, yes, that is a very real issue. And how do we bring the knowledge that is available with companies and with trained professionals outside India into India by way of training? We need to encourage that exchange of information, whereas what we're trying to do is to say that we will develop indigenous talent, which are without giving the indigenous talent the opportunity to learn from what's available in the market. So somewhere we need to draw the line between trying to develop indigenous talent at the cost of a competitive advantage.
But the supporting infrastructure, Vivek, plays a very crucial role in the economic growth, because I want to understand, one of your previous answers, you spoke about the center, the federal government and the states collaborating in some way to create those situations, the environment to build entrepreneurship. But in cities like Bangalore, Hyderabad, states like Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, in terms of real estate, flexible office spaces, transportation, trained manpower, and social infrastructure, how can these insights be applied to other regions in India as well?
So I think now, take Bangalore or Pune, for instance. They were both small towns, a few years ago. So they were not really developed to, thinking that, 50 years later or 100 years later that they'd have these kind of populations. So there was no planning whatsoever. And even to the extent, that there are now planning laws, those are observed more in the breach. So because everybody typically would have, if he has a small plot of land on which he can build 2 stories, he'd go and build 5 stories. There's absolutely no implementation of those laws. And that's why those problems are happening. There are several developments, in whether it's in Chennai or in Bangalore, where, developments have come up on swamps or places where there were fields earlier. There've been large-scale flooding. Now, people attribute it to climate change and all the rest of it. But the fact is, if you had a new city which was well developed, like say a Chandigarh, you wouldn't have all these problems. And you implemented the zoning laws very strictly. Some time ago, there was talk about having 100 new cities. That is something that we really need to have. So if you have 100 new cities, you could really have infrastructure. You'd have great roads. You could have railway depots coming right up. You could ensure that they had, connectivity with the ports. You'd have cold chain logistics to ensure that food doesn't get spoiled. So I was talking to someone the other day and they said that, 50% of some of our agricultural commodities that are actually produced with such hard work get spoiled and thrown away. Because you want tomatoes in Karnataka, they are growing dime a dozen in some other place, but by the time they reach here, they are spoiled. So if you can have those kind of logistics, imagine how much better the economy could do. So, I think all these learnings really come down to governance, implementation and policy. So if we have proper policy in place, I'm sure all the learnings that we have got from, the cities that you talked about can be effected all over India, and it would be in the interest of all.
And it kind of follows from your initial assertion that we need to decongest the initial growth hubs that we have created.
Absolutely.
We've reached perhaps saturation points in Mumbai, Delhi, Gurgaon, Pune, Hyderabad, etc. I want to, pick your brain a little bit on the decongestion part and the second answer that you gave, which is about, expanding to other cities. It's not going to be easy, which means that one, center and states have to work together, but also government to government, because governments may change, political parties may change. The consistency of policy between now and 2047. How do we ensure that the policy making remains consistent, looking at the aims that we have and the aspirations that we have? And how do we tie in with the problems that we are facing now in terms of decongestion in the growth hubs?
See, expense, I believe, is something that can be managed. Now, take Gurgaon, for instance. 40 years ago, where was Gurgaon? DLF decided that they were going to develop this area. They brought in the required infrastructure, and look how well Gurgaon is doing. Just like that, today, the Karnataka government is talking about South Bangalore, the new South Bangalore, which is actually Ramnagaram, and places like that. If they really put their minds to it and they convince, every week people are coming into Bangalore and talking to the leadership about, wanting to invest in Bangalore and wanting to be given land and wanting to be given infrastructure. If they were really keen to do it, they could definitely develop hubs like that, and you would have private participants who would be very happy to come invest money and develop those regions. So I don't think that's a problem. I think there's enough and more money that is available where they see opportunities. And if you give these investors the right opportunities, I think they'd be only too happy to come and invest money. So yes, it is very important that the state government and the central government work together. When it comes to roads, Nitin Gadkari is doing a great job. Now, some of the state roads, for instance, in some of the states are horrible. But I guess that's what happens in a federal system. It's, we enjoy being a democracy. And these are some of the ills that we'll have to live with. But I still think that, if the intention is there, the state governments can easily come up with these hubs, provide the right infrastructure, and I believe people will move. Even in our law firm itself, we encourage several of the ladies who, have had young children to work from, their native places. It's so much easier. They're more productive because they don't spend 2 hours in traffic. Their children are taken care of by their parents. They are also come and tell us, we are happy to take a haircut on salaries because we're not going to be spending money on rents and things like that. So if, we proceed on that basis, I think, there could be a lot of benefits by actually decongesting these large cities and encouraging people to work from outside.
Simultaneously, it's the expectations of founders as well, because we know that these are the foundational aspects of the growth for the economy, and there are some nuances like work allowing technology allowing people to work from home or wherever. But in terms of expectations of startups, we know that entrepreneurship is the key to creating both economic value and jobs. At the same time, entrepreneurs also face procedural challenges that perhaps impinge on their ability to generate that value. So how do we overcome this? Because we know that there are certain expectations. See, investors have expectations. No doubt the government has expectations, and they have certain ambitions and aspirations for which they've created those policies. But founders themselves will ask questions not only of themselves, but also, what are they doing at the end of the day to create that value? So if we have to answer that question, what are those answers that you would advise those founders to ask those questions?
So if we look at founders today and how they interact with investors, even very early stage founders are very savvy. So they completely understand what investor expectations are. They know how to pitch to an investor sitting in one of the most sophisticated cities in the world. They know how to present their business plan. They know how to present that idea. I think where they face a challenge is between what they want to do and what they can do is in terms of regulatory gaps, in terms of what the law allows them to do to some extent. So, for instance, we just yesterday or a day or two ago, 2 of the largest CEOs in the world wrote about how Europe is primed for a huge growth story, But what's holding back is the fear of technology and the way that while trying to protect their own domain and sovereignty, they're losing a competitive advantage. The same principle could apply to India as well. So what founders are facing is a legal system that holds them back from implementing the business plan that they would like to implement or grow in the way that they'd like to grow. Because on the one hand, the government is hesitant about what technology can do. And this is not to say that the government doesn't understand the value of technology. We're seeing technology being integrated into large platforms as part of the India Stack, which is a great success story. But in terms of India Stack 1, which is a huge success, if we move to India Stack 2, we need to give the founders who need to contribute to that growth the freedom to do what they want to do in a regulatory environment. So while there are regulatory sandboxes, etc., if we want to see the next UPI kind of success story, we need to probably give them a freer regulatory environment in terms of incorporating technology and using things like artificial intelligence and deep tech. The second thing is, on the other hand, which we are seeing is the government is still, the framework of the law in terms of exchange control law still believes that Indians need to be protected from the outside world. So it still would like Indians to comply with certain norms from the intention of saying, you must ensure that you're not losing money or you're not losing something in a bad deal because you haven't really thought it through. Founders are very savvy and they completely understand the business transaction they're getting into. Sometimes there might be great value which they're not able to access because the regulatory environment imposes things like pricing guidelines or restrictions on how to give others stock options or restrictions on how to get foreign investment, which prevent them from growing and giving the investors the kind of deal that the investors want for the founders to benefit as well. So these are the way that the law is drafted itself is the very beginning of the law is a challenge. And then when you look at the implementation, Vivek made a very valid point. A founder cannot open the law today on the internet and read it and understand what the intention is. You still need to engage with regulators through authorized dealer banks or through other agents or intermediaries to understand whether something is possible, even if something is written in plain words in the law. So the gap between what the law wants to do in terms of what is the stated intention of the law and what is practically being done is quite a bit. So if a founder wants to, for instance, import certain components, he might face a huge challenge with the customs authorities, whereas the policy might say, we encourage you to do this. So these are the kind of gaps that the founder is facing between what the government wants people to do and what the people can actually do in terms of growing their business.
On the other side of the table, of course, are the investors. I mean, they have their own expectations. They have their own challenges to work with founders, etc. In your experience dealing with all the mergers and acquisitions that you've done so far and advised all the senior companies in the country, what are the key points that the investors look for in an ideal startup scenario? If in India, for example, if grassroots services or the manufacturing sector growth needs to happen, we also need to clear the decks for the ease of investment as much as we need to make it easy for conducting the business in the long run. So from an investor point of view, what are those conditions that they look for?
Firstly, they look for a good idea. They look to see, gone are the days when people would say only a good idea and we are losing millions of rupees. Today, they want to see you at least broken even and there's a chance that in the near future, you're going to be making money. Then they want to see that they are investing with a trustworthy promoter. It's very important because they do their background checks on them. They also look at the kind of company that they are in. They check and see whether, things have been done in the company which would violate the FCPA and things like that. So those are the things they initially look at. So when very often founders don't bother, they set up a company, they have a great idea, and then they don't comply with laws. They violated every single law, right from foreign exchange and otherwise. When investors come in and read in your diligence report and see that there are all these problems, that they get put off a little bit. So it's very important for founders to start complying with, taking care of all the little bits, keeping their house tidy right from the start, because it makes a big impact on investors and on valuations. That's apart from the fact that, the idea is good, the financials look good and all the rest of it. So that's what I really seen.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode because we've run out of time, but we're just in time to understand that we end on a positive note because we know that there are regulatory frameworks already available to all of us to make that growth jump possible. Transforming India, the road to 2047 may not may look challenging, but given the fact that we're a democracy, we have rule of law, we have government that believes in consistent policy making and consistent over several governments, it means that the road to 2047 may not be as difficult and challenging as we think it is. Thank you, Vivek, and thank you, Archana, for discussing those strategies today. They will undoubtedly play a large and huge role in shaping our journey. Thank you for sharing your vision, your expertise, and thank you for our listeners for tuning in. Stay connected with us for more such episodes. Transforming India, the road to 2047 will continue. This episode is out now on all audio streaming channels. This is Sachin Kalbagh signing off. Thank you very much.